These are 5 problems with intellectual discourse in our current society. So I know this is probably a little bit different from the other videos that I have done in this 5 Reasons series dealing with different theological topics, because this is a little more broad. So this isn't just dealing with theology in particular, but this is just dealing with intellectual discourse in general in our society and how these things function and some of the problems, I think, with contemporary intellectual discourse. And I say this, of course, as one engaged within the discipline of theology, and my own experience certainly is going to be in theology and engaging in these kinds of questions. But I think that these issues are a lot broader than just that, as they affect basically every academic discipline today. Now, the first problem is social media. No, I don't think social media is all bad. I think it's good in a lot of ways, and it gives people opportunities to connect with certain ideas and people who have similar ideas in a way that maybe they wouldn't before. So, in theological circles, for example, it's not like I can find people who are into academic theology, just walking down the street or hanging out downtown. So this gives you a place where you can connect with people who have similar ideas and get into discussions and debates and those kinds of things in a way that you weren't able to do previously. Now, that's not to say that it necessarily is always as beneficial as, meeting together to have a disputation in the lecture hall or something like that. But nonetheless, it can be a positive thing, and I use social media all the time. Of course, I'm putting this on YouTube, so obviously I'm not opposed to those kinds of things. But there are some negative things that happen with social media, and especially, I think, with Twitter. And I see this on Facebook as well in some other ways. But in that is that we like to have our ideas, because of social media, in these little bite-sized packages. And the way that we like to have our ideas spoken is maybe with a good insult or a clever wordplay or a meme or a joke that's really funny. And we want to just get it out there as quickly and succinctly as possible. And people don't take the time like they used to, and not everybody, of course. But I think it lends to a mentality where people aren't trying to take the time to think about nuance of various issues. And instead what they're doing is just kind of throwing out their own point of view in a quick way, putting it out there. And what it does is it also encourages people who are involved in whatever discipline it is to not really spend the time to get in depth on issues, and instead to throw out, a tweet that can be retweeted 200 times that's something that's clever, or a good insult towards somebody they disagree with. And, I see this all the time, because when I do something short and witty, and I've thrown out things like that, and I'm not very good at that. I'm not that witty, to be honest. I like to get in depth on issues. But, if I throw out a tweet that's really good and witty or something like that, or insult the right people that you're supposed to insult. You go after Joel Osteen every single day, as some people do on Twitter, which, all right, we all know the issues with Joel Osteen, but sometimes people just take those shots because, hey, it's going to get you retweets, it's going to get you popularity if you keep doing that. And I've seen it myself. So when you get more in depth on academic issues, it's just going to have a smaller audience, and that's just the way it is in our culture. And I guess that's the way it's always been in some ways, because not everybody's an academic, and that's fine. Not everybody has to be. There's nothing about, it doesn't make you superior to be an academic or not. It's just a calling that some people have and others certainly don't. But I think it's problematic when we're driven so much by popularity, by views, by getting retweets, by getting people to agree with us, and social media does a lot of that. So I think it can really hamper intellectual discourse in a lot of ways, which I think is really unfortunate. And there's really not a lot of place for nuance on social media, because we have such a short attention span that we don't want to think through issues very in depth. And so we like to have a 3-minute clip. And, I brought out before, this is kind of like those conservatives love these, and I'm conservative, but really I'm libertarian if we're talking politically, but, love these things where it's Ben Shapiro destroys feminism in 3 words, and you've got some short interaction that's 20 seconds long, and, people watch that and they love it and they share it all over the place. But then when you realize, oh, this is part of actually a longer lecture that gets into a lot of depth, maybe academically, ideologically, then that doesn't have many views on it. It's just, we want the little sound clips. We really like those. So again, like I said, social media can be a really positive thing, but these are, I think, some of the negative aspects of social media in contemporary discourse in our culture. The second is that we are way too obsessed with personal stories. We care so much about personal stories. We care about who was hurt by something, what effects something had on somebody's life, what made somebody feel better. And, I don't want to downplay personal stories because people are important. God cares about us as individuals. We're created in the image of God, and I'm a pastor, and it's my calling to shepherd souls and to care about individuals. But there's a problem when personal stories end up replacing facts, and personal stories end up replacing truth. And you see this so often, and I see this in theology all the time, where somebody leaves one, theological tradition, for example, for another, and they give you the reasons why, and the reasons or the explanations have nothing to do with the fact that, they're saying, well, I studied Scripture, objectively I saw that this thing was true, this didn't line up with this, so I figured that this had to be true, and I went here. It ends up being things like, well, I felt really bad about this, and this person told me this thing, and it made me feel a lot better. And so when we're engaged in dialogue, we're dealing so much with personal stories that then becomes the criterion of truth. And then we say things like, well, somebody was hurt by this thing. And so if they were hurt by this, therefore it's bad, therefore we shouldn't believe that. And again, we should care about people being hurt. I mean, that should matter to us, but at the same time, that doesn't determine what's true. Whether something makes you feel good or bad does not determine whether it's true or not. So it's kind of irrelevant when you're talking about objective truth. Now, you deal with feelings and experiences and persons and all of that following that, but you don't do it devoid of the truth. So that's what really matters. And I see this so many times in theological debates where somebody throws out something, a statement, and then the other person says, but that will hurt this, or this. Or, but that means this, or this, which really is about, persons and who it hurts. And you see this, for example, with, the gay Christian movement that's popular in some circles right now, is that there's so much attention to, like, well, this hurts people, so this can't be right. Or, telling your own story. And you see this in debates over the issues of homosexuality and things like that in different denominations where people are discussing those issues, and in the debates, the one side is so often just giving personal stories. Well, it hurt me when someone told me that this was wrong. And you see all these people, kind of going out of Christianity. They've got this like exodus from evangelicalism or whatever, where to progressive Christianity or something else. And what they do is they just tell their stories and talk about how they were so hurt by something that happened to them. And I'm not negating the fact that there are real hurts and real issues, but I'm talking about people being just overly sensitive to things and saying like, I'm a woman and I really, really wanted to be a pastor and I felt like I was gifted at it, but someone told me the Bible said that was not right and that I couldn't be a pastor because that office is only for men, and I'm mad and people are so mean to me and therefore Christianity is bad or evangelicalism is bad or whatever. So these kinds of things, and I'm not talking about real hurt like sexual abuse issues and things like that are real things that we need to deal with. But that just doesn't determine truth. And so I think that you have a big problem when we focus so much on personal stories. Again, personal stories matter, but they're not the criterion of truth. And we need to found ourselves really in the objective truths of, well, as in theology, the Word of God. And that's what we use to judge. And then we deal with other things after that. The third problem is that we are so obsessed with labels and labeling the ideologies of other people, and then using those labels as a way to dismiss somebody's argument and not actually carefully engage with it at all. And this happens all across the spectrum, from all over the place. And I know conservatives like to say it's just the liberals that do this when the liberals are talking about things like racism and white privilege and all of this. But really, conservatives do it exactly the same way. They just use different terms. That's Marxism, or you're a snowflake if you think this or that. And there are certain terms that are just thrown out that we use in our society. And we use those as ways to basically just not actually engage with somebody else's argument. So, on the one hand, you say things like, well, that's racist, or that's homophobic, or transphobic, or whatever. But then from the other end of things, you could just say, well, that's Marxist, and say that's bad as well from a conservative perspective. And I've seen some kind of pseudo-conservative intellectuals do that, where they just call everything Marxism without really much of an understanding of what Marxism actually is. But and it's just, well, you're a Marxist if you think this. And I've seen this from those who are racist, really. We have to define, of course, again, what that means exactly, because racist, again, is one of those terms that people just kind of throw around as a way to dismiss your argument. But I think there really are some people who are racist. But this is dealing with like white nationalism. Some of the people that are involved in that movement will just call everyone a Marxist who disagree with their ideas, instead of actually engaging with what you have to say. And this happens from all over the spectrum. And so in theology, I see this all the time, where you're labeled a pietist, because pietism is bad, right? The pietists are the worst. So if you're in Lutheran theology, you call someone a pietist, that means you're bad, and that means that whatever you say doesn't matter, instead of actually engaging with the scriptural text or something like that that someone's bringing up. So I've talked about issues of sanctification, and I bring up certain scriptural texts or passages in our Lutheran confessions, and the response is, well, that's pietism. Okay, well, let's actually get into the argument instead of just throwing around accusations and things like that. Never mind the fact that most people that throw around the term pietism don't actually understand pietism as a historical movement, but that's a whole other question. But in any theological circle, this happens in different ways. Within Calvinism, you might be just calling people Arminians or semi-Pelagians or something else as a way to dismiss their argument. Roman Catholics call people pseudo-Protestants, to dismiss their arguments, because nothing's worse than a Protestant, of course. So, in whatever field you're in, or whatever dialogues that you have, don't just throw around those terms. And sometimes, those terms, it doesn't mean that you can never use labels, because sometimes they're apt. But don't do it mindlessly, and don't use it as the sole thing that you're doing to dismiss somebody's argument. So yeah, maybe somebody is racist, and maybe it's fine to say that they are racist. But then give an explanation of why, and get into the details, and give an argument for it, instead of just throwing a label out there and then expecting that label to just dismiss the other person without actually engaging in the ideas. And the fourth is that we've lost a lot of the discussions that have been part of the Western tradition since Plato and Aristotle. So a lot of ideas in classical philosophy. Now, I'm not talking about the Eastern traditions and Eastern philosophies and things like that, just because that's not really where I don't understand that. I haven't studied those things, so don't think, if you're from the East, that I'm just dismissing you because of your culture. I'm not. It's just that I'm not properly informed on those things to be able to really make a strong argument or talk about those things when I'm really not an expert in it, which gets into another problem with discourse today. But and that is, I think, the classical categories of philosophy that begin with Plato and Aristotle, Aristotelian logic, also the notion of things like essentialism, that there are essences, distinct essences that things have that we all participate in. So there is an essence of what makes a human, and so the fact that I am a human and my wife and kids are humans is more than just the fact that we tend to have some similar aspects to us, so our mind just categorizes them as the same kind of thing. No, there is an actual essential thing that is humanness, right? Humanity that we have, and this is lost in a lot of gender debates today. People talk about gender essentialism, that there is an essence to the genders male and female. Now, if you throw out essences, essentialism, you throw out the idea that there are actual distinctive essences and distinctive things that can be studied and examined as they are, then you get into a lot of problems, because you say things like, gender's a spectrum, because there's not really a thing as maleness and femaleness anyway. There's no essence of maleness or essence of femaleness that people participate in. Instead, there are just individuals that we kind of categorize as those who have these similar qualities are male, those who have these similar qualities are female. And if there's no essence behind those things, then of course, it makes sense that everybody can just be categorized as whatever you feel like, because it's up to us to make the categories ourselves. And this leads to immense problems just in academic discourse in general. So I think that, and this really has to do with the shifts in Western philosophy that have to do with, modern philosophy, which begins with Descartes and the idea of the autonomous individual, which then goes through Kant and his division between the noumenal and phenomenal. But we don't have to get into all the details of what all that is. But I think this all kind of leads to existentialism and then postmodernism, which is where we're at today, where there is no real objective meaning. There is no real objective meaning in texts. That's really where Derrida begins. But there's no meaning in really anything. Our minds just categorize things as we do, and everything is primarily subjective. We create truth ourselves. And this is, this idea that people talk about today, which one of the phrases that just drives me insane is you have to speak your truth, your truth. There's no such thing as your truth. There's truth. There's no your truth. It's either true or it's not. There's God's truth, but God's truth is the truth. I don't have a truth that differs from your truth. That might be my subjective opinion or experience, but that's not the criterion of what truth is. And I think because we've lost the foundations of classical philosophy, I think that's led to a lot of this. And this is just kind of the inevitable conclusion of departing from that. So it begins with Descartes, but really it ends, I think, in postmodernism, and that affects what we're seeing in our culture today. And it really just doesn't leave room for intellectual discussion in so many ways, because we don't have a world that is really comprehensible and objective. All we have is a bunch of individuals who subjectively apply their own ideas onto whatever they experience. So that's just kind of what we're left with. So I think that's a major problem, is the philosophical shift away from classical philosophy in our culture. And the fifth and final thing that is problematic in intellectual discourse in our contemporary culture is that everyone thinks they're an expert on everything, right? We all think that we are experts on absolutely anything, because what social media has done is given everyone a voice. Now, like I said, I think that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. So there's positives and negatives. The negative aspect of it is we all think sometimes that we have something worthwhile to say on every single subject. And people who don't have an education on an issue, have not taken the proper time to study an issue, then they put their voices out there. And what's happened with social media is that now those who are the most influential on any particular topic, it's not those who have the proper education and training, who have published books and articles on particular subjects or anything like that. It's just whoever is able to get the biggest social media presence, and it could be because they're good looking, or look at Tommy Lahren, I think, is a good example of that. Somebody who says she doesn't actually really read books, but somebody who people think is attractive. Or it could be that they just have a lot of charisma, and maybe the most intellectual people with the best ideas have no charisma and are kind of funny looking. And we dismiss their ideas, and they're not influential, not because they're not brilliant, but because they don't fit the criterion of what makes you a social media star or something like that. So this is a huge problem, and I see people all the time who are not in proper positions, who don't have the proper training, coming out and saying that they're experts on X, Y, or Z, and they think that they have a voice that everyone needs to hear. And it's true, not everyone needs, academic training. You don't need a PhD to have something good to say. But if you are going to get into the world of ideas, at least be educated about the ideas that you're talking about and the ideas that you're critiquing. Whether you have an official degree or not is not really the point, because I know plenty of people with PhDs that don't really know their field very well at all. And at the same time, I know people that don't have PhDs that know their field better than most people with PhDs. So that's not really the point. But the point is being educated. And I think we have to learn to stop ourselves in talking about things that we're not informed about. And, this is something that I've had to learn to do, hosting a podcast on theology for, 5 years now, or whenever I started that. I think it was 2013, so I think it's been 5 years now. People ask me, all sorts of questions, and there are certain things that I have to stop myself from talking about because I'm not that well informed. I don't know everything, and it's tempting to just think that you do because, oh, hey, people look to me for advice about this and this, therefore I can talk about anything. And you can't. Nobody can. It's the reason why I said people have brought up to me, well, you talk about classical Western philosophy, but what about Eastern philosophy and how Christian theology in, China or India, and, can we incorporate ideas of Eastern philosophy and those terminologies and things like that? And I don't have anything to say about that because it would be foolish for me to do that simply because I'm not educated in that area. There are people that are, and I think that's an important thing to be aware of, but at the same time, I can't make statements about something that I'm not, at least at this point, informed on, so I can't do that. And we need to make sure we do that. We need to make sure, don't speak if you don't have expertise about something. And it's also okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, like, I believe this, but I don't know all of the details about this discussion. That's okay. And I feel like people aren't okay, and we want to be able to argue everything, and we have to be okay saying, this is not an area where I am an expert, and therefore I kind of leave that alone. People have wanted me to get involved in the creation evolution debates, and honestly, it's not a debate that I have ever wanted to get into, not because I don't have a strong stance on the issue, but because it's just something that I haven't studied to the extent that I really am able to engage with the sources in a manner that is adequate. So I would have to devote the time, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to engage with, and I can engage with the ideas philosophically in some of the implications of Darwinian ideology, but I'm not going to engage in the scientific debates about evidence and fossils. I mean, I'm no expert on it. So, what relevance does that have to me? I'm not going to help you. All I'm going to do if I talk about it is give you some arguments that you could probably find online from somebody who's more qualified than I am, who will word those things better. So I think we all have to realize this about ourselves. And, if you want to speak out on an issue, get educated about it. And if you don't want to take the time to get educated about it and read and look at the other side, then just don't talk about it. And that's fine. We don't have to, be experts on everything, and nobody is. All right, so I hope you found this video helpful. Like I said, I know this is kind of different from some of the other stuff I've done on, but I think it's important. So let me know if you have any comments or questions, and make sure you check out our other videos and subscribe. And if you have any other ideas, things that you want me to discuss in this or other series, let me know. We'll see you next time. God bless.